Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Was it amazing or just okay? Drop a rating from 1 to 10 in the comments. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. The apartment was nothing special, but it was mine. A one-bedroom in an aging brick building on the outskirts of the city. The rent was cheap, the location convenient, and I had convinced myself that the peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, and the faint, sour smell of mildew were just quirks of affordable living. I had lived in worse places. It wasn't until the second week that I started hearing things. It began subtly, a faint tapping sound in the walls while I was brushing my teeth at night, the occasional soft scuffing noise in the ceiling above my bed. The kind of sounds that old buildings make, pipes settling, wood contracting, neighbors shifting around. At least, that's what I told myself. But something about these sounds felt deliberate. Not random creaks or groans from a settling structure. They had rhythm. A series of 3 slow taps, then silence, then 3 more. I tried to ignore it, to write it off as the quirks of a poorly maintained building. But every night, as the world outside dimmed and the sounds of traffic faded, it became impossible to tune out. Then came the whispers. I first heard them while lying in bed, the hum of the city outside my window, acting as a dull backdrop to the room's stillness. A voice low, just on the edge of perception. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I was exhausted, stretched thin from long shifts at work, and my mind had been playing tricks on me lately. But then, it happened again. A faint murmur, just beneath the surface of hearing, words I couldn't quite make out. I sat up, pulse hammering. I wasn't the type to scare easily. I had spent years living alone, renting whatever cheap place I could afford. I knew the sounds of old buildings, the way pipes could groan and wind could slither through the smallest cracks. But this was different. I crept out of bed, my bare feet silent against the cold wooden floor. Slowly, I approached the kitchen, where the whispering seemed to be coming from. I hesitated before turning on the light. The moment the bulb flickered to life, the whispering stopped. My apartment was empty. The only sound was the faint hum of my fridge. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the tiny space, the scratched wooden table, the sagging cabinets, the single window overlooking the fire escape. Nothing was out of place. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. Maybe I was just stressed. Maybe I needed sleep. I turned off the light and headed back to bed, forcing myself to push the unease aside. But in the silence that followed, I could still feel it. That unnerving awareness that I was not alone. The next day I brought it up to the landlord. His office was a tiny cluttered space tucked beside the building's entrance, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee and old paper. He was a man in his late 50s, wiry and sun-weathered, with yellowing fingernails and a permanent scowl. "Noise complaints?" he muttered, barely glancing up from his newspaper. "Yeah," I said, shifting uncomfortably. "There's been tapping in the walls, and voices." That got his attention. He set the newspaper down, leveling me with a flat, unimpressed stare. It's an old building, he said. Pipes shift, neighbors talk. You're not the first tenant to hear things. Right, but, I hesitated. The tapping, it's weird, like a pattern. His expression didn't change. Old buildings make noise, he repeated, as if that was the only answer I was going to get. A flicker of irritation rose in me. I had dealt with lazy landlords before, the kind who barely maintained their properties and dismissed complaints without a second thought. But something about his tone, the way he was looking at me, like he was waiting for me to drop, it rubbed me the wrong way. You sure there's nothing in the walls? I pressed. No animals? No leaks? He sighed, rubbing his temples. I'll send someone up next week to take a look, he said. That good enough? I could tell it wasn't a real offer, just a way to get me out of his office. But I nodded anyway. Yeah, thanks. I left feeling worse than when I came in. That night, the tapping started earlier. Right as I was making dinner, a slow, deliberate series of knocks echoed through the walls. I stopped mid-stir, gripping the wooden spoon too tightly. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I turned off the stove, heart pounding. I walked to the far wall, pressing my ear against the cold surface. Silence. Then, a soft dragging sound, like fingertips gliding across the wood. I jerked away from the wall, my breathing uneven. Number? No, that was not normal. I grabbed my phone, pulling up my contacts. Who was I even going to call? The police? And say what? I think I hear fingertips in my walls. Number? I needed proof, so I set up a camera. I dug through my closet, pulling out an old webcam I hadn't used in years. I positioned it on the kitchen counter, facing the living room and the small hallway leading to my bedroom. If something or someone was in my apartment at night, I would know. That thought terrified me more than it should have, because deep down I already knew the answer. Something was in here, and it was getting bolder. That night I barely slept. I kept my bedroom door slightly open, my ears straining for every sound. The tapping started around 2 a.m. I lay there, perfectly still, listening as the knocks traveled from one wall to another, like something moving through the space behind them. Then came the whispers. They were closer now. No longer muffled, but right outside my bedroom door. A single word. A name. My name. I stopped breathing. My skin prickled, cold terror crawling up my spine. Number. I had imagined that. I had to have imagined that. But then, a soft creak, the sound of a cabinet opening. I forced myself to move, to get up. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept toward the door, every step painfully slow. The hallway was dark, too dark. I inched forward, heart hammering. I reached the kitchen and stopped. Every cabinet door was wide open. Every single one. A cold, sick feeling spread through my chest. Then I remembered the camera. I had proof now. With shaking hands, I turned on the kitchen light and grabbed my laptop, pulling up the recorded footage. The video buffered for a second. Then it played. At first there was nothing, just the quiet stillness of the apartment, the dim glow of the street lights outside. Then, movement, a vent cover sliding open, and something crawling out. The video played in silence. The dim glow of my kitchen bathed the room in pale light. The timestamp in the corner read 2:13 a.m. right around the time I'd heard the whispering. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then movement. My stomach twisted as I watched the vent cover the one in the hallway near my bedroom shift. At first, it was subtle, a gentle wobble like air pressure was pushing against it. But then, slowly, deliberately, the cover slid open. A hand emerged, thin, pale, fingers long and bony, the skin stretched too tightly over the knuckles. It gripped the edges of the vent, pulling itself forward. I wanted to stop the video. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. I could only watch. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder, then a head. A man, crawling out of the vent in my hallway. His movements were slow, unnatural, like he hadn't used his muscles in a long time. He pulled himself onto the floor, his limbs trembling as he adjusted to his weight. His face was obscured by the poor lighting, but I could see the way he moved, deliberate, calculated. He didn't stand up. Instead, he crawled, on all fours. Like an animal, my breath hitched as I watched him slink forward, his head tilting from side to side, as if listening. And then, he turned his head toward the camera. I froze. I couldn't see his features clearly, but I could make out his eyes dark, sunken, locked onto the lens as if he knew. As if he was looking right at me. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. The man sat there, unmoving, for an unbearable moment. Then he started crawling again, straight toward my bedroom door. I slammed the laptop shut. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My body felt numb, my thoughts racing too fast to process. This wasn't just some bad dream. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had been in my apartment last night. Someone had crawled out of my vents. And he had been watching me. I forced myself to think, what do I do? I couldn't stay here. That much was obvious. I needed to leave, immediately. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. It rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. I stared at my screen, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I tried again. Nothing. What the hell? I checked the time, 5:04 a.m. Maybe the signal was bad. Maybe there was some outage in the area. But that didn't matter. I couldn't stay here another second. I grabbed a bag, stuffing in whatever I could: wallet, keys, laptop, charger. Then I heard it. A soft creak from the hallway. I froze. I hadn't closed the vent. Slowly, I turned toward the hallway. The apartment was silent. But the vent cover was open again. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move. I crept toward the door, my heart beat a hammer against my ribs. And then, a whisper. From inside the vent, "Where are you going?" I ran. I grabbed my bag, yanked the front door open and sprinted into the hallway. My bare feet slapped against the cold tile as I threw myself toward the stairwell, not daring to look back. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting long, warped shadows against the peeling wallpaper. I could still hear him, crawling, behind me. Faster now. I burst through the stairwell door, nearly tripping down the steps. I took them two at a time, heart hammering, pulse roaring in my ears. The apartment entrance was only 2 more flights down. Almost there. Almost. A loud bang echoed from above. A vent cover crashing onto the stairwell landing. My breath hitched. I looked up and saw him, hanging halfway out of the vent, his body contorted in a way that wasn't natural. His head snapped toward me. His mouth curled into a smile. I ran. I flew down the last flight of stairs, the entrance door just ahead. I slammed into it, shoving it open with both hands, and stumbled into the cold morning air. I didn't stop running. Not until I was 3 blocks away. Not until I was sure that he wasn't behind me. The sun had barely risen by the time I made it to a 24-hour diner. I sat in the corner, shaking, clutching my coffee like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I needed to call the police. I needed to tell someone. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I kept seeing him, the way he crawled, the way he smiled, the way he had looked straight into the camera like he had known I was watching. I swallowed hard, forcing my fingers to dial. 911. It rang twice before a dispatcher picked up. 911, what's your emergency? I exhaled, my voice barely steady. There's a man in my apartment. I don't know who he is. He was in my vents. I have it on video. The line was silent for a moment. Then the dispatcher spoke. Ma'am, what's your address? I gave it to her, my pulse still racing. Another pause. Then, that's Sarah, you sure that's the correct address? I frowned. Yes, apartment 3B. Why? More silence. Then, ma'am, we received a call from that apartment last night at 2:17 a.m. My blood turned to ice. 2:17 a.m. Right when I had heard the whispering. Wait, what? My voice was barely above a whisper. Wauho called. Another pause. Then, her next words made my stomach drop. The call came from inside your apartment. I gripped the phone tighter, my breath shallow, heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear myself think. What do you mean the call came from inside my apartment? The dispatcher hesitated. I could hear her typing, the distant murmur of other operators in the background. Then, in a tone that sent a chill down my spine, she said, it was a male voice. He didn't say anything, just breathing. Then he hung up. I felt my stomach lurch. The man in my vents had called the police himself. I tried to speak, but my voice came out thin, hollow. Did the officers respond? Yes, but when they arrived, no one was inside. The door was locked. They assumed it was a prank call. I clenched my jaw, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. I needed to get out of here. I needed someone to believe me. Can you send someone now? I whispered. Yes, stay where you are. An officer will meet you at the diner shortly." I hung up and exhaled shakily. My hands were trembling so badly, I nearly knocked over my coffee. The reality was sinking in. I had been living with him, sleeping while he moved through my walls, while he watched me. And the worst part, he had wanted me to know. The officer arrived within 15 minutes, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, wearing the weary expression of someone who had seen too much. "Miss Carter?" I nodded, still clutching my bag. He gestured to the seat across from me. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I laid it out, everything. The noises, the tapping, the whispering, the footage of the man crawling out of the vent. I watched his face carefully, expecting skepticism, but to my surprise, his expression darkened. "You said you have video proof?" I nodded quickly, pulling out my laptop. My hands were still unsteady as I opened the file, my stomach tightening as I forced myself to watch it again. The vent, the hand, the crawling. The officer watched in silence, his jaw tightening. When the figure turned its head toward the camera, something in his face shifted. Recognition. Like he had seen this before. I swallowed hard. "You believe me, don't you?" He exhaled through his nose, leaning back in his chair. "You said you just moved in, right? A couple weeks ago." "Yes." "Before you, do you know who lived in that apartment?" I frowned. "No." The officer was silent for a moment. Then, in a low, careful voice, he said, "A woman lived there before you, a college student. She went missing about 6 months ago, left everything behind: wallet, keys, laptop. Just disappeared. No signs of a break-in. No signs of foul play." A hollow feeling opened up in my chest. "She lived in my unit." The officer nodded. I felt sick. The missing woman, the strange noises, the man in the vents. They had searched the apartment, found nothing, because they had been looking in the wrong place. I gripped the edge of the table, voice barely above a whisper. "He took her, didn't he?" The officer's gaze was grim. "We never found a body." When we returned to my apartment, backup was already there. 2 more officers and a maintenance worker, all standing outside my door. I stood back as they entered, my pulse thrumming in my ears. The apartment looked the same except for the vent. It was open again. The officers approached it cautiously. One reached up and shined a flashlight inside. And that's when I saw his face go pale. He turned to the other officer. "Call it in. We've got a crawl space." My stomach twisted. A crawl space. Meaning the vents weren't just vents. They led somewhere. The maintenance worker pried the cover off completely, revealing a dark, narrow passage. The stench that rolled out was horrific. Something rotting. I covered my mouth, fighting the urge to gag. One of the officers climbed up, squeezing himself inside. For several minutes, there was nothing but silence. Then his muffled voice. "Jesus Christ." The room tensed. "What is it?" the lead officer called. More silence. Then, "You need to see this." They found a network of tunnels running behind the walls. Old maintenance crawl spaces long forgotten, winding through the entire building. And in them, a nest. Dirty blankets, food wrappers, a pile of stolen items, lipsticks, jewelry, hair ties, and photographs. So many photographs of me, sleeping, brushing my hair, cooking dinner, dozens of candids, all taken from inside my apartment. I felt my knees go weak. This man had been living in my walls. The officer emerged, his face grim. "We need forensics in here. This is a crime scene now." My voice shook. "Where is he?" The officer hesitated. Then, "He's not here." They never caught him. The search lasted weeks. They brought dogs, thermal imaging, ripped open walls, and checked every vent in the building. But the man, whoever he was gone. Vanished. No name, no fingerprints. A ghost. The only thing they found? A single note tucked inside his filthy bedding. 4 words, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I liked watching you. I never set foot in that apartment again." I broke my lease the same day, left the city within a week. For a long time, I had nightmares of tapping in the walls, of a hand reaching out of the vents, of waking up to find him crawling toward my bed, and sometimes, even now, I wake up in the dead of night, my heart hammering, ears straining for the sound of something moving through the walls, and I wonder, did he find someone new? Is he watching them now, listening, waiting for the perfect moment to crawl out again? I first noticed the flowers in early spring. A small bouquet of daisies left neatly on my doorstep, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe a neighbor had received a delivery by mistake. Maybe someone had left them for their partner and set them down in the wrong place. I took them inside, setting them on my kitchen counter, and forgot about them within the hour. A few days later, another bouquet appeared. This time roses, deep red, almost velvety. They were left in the exact same spot, just outside my apartment door. The ribbon was identical to the first, tied in the same perfect knot. It felt odd, but not alarming. I lived in a quiet building, mostly filled with older residents who kept to themselves. I had only moved in a few months ago and had yet to make any real friends in the area. There was no one who would have done this for me. I knocked on my next-door neighbor's door, an older woman named Diane who was always baking and offering cookies to the tenants. She answered with a warm smile, wiping flour from her hands. I held up the roses. "Hey, did you leave these for me?" Her smile faltered. "No, sweetheart, but they're lovely. Secret admirer, maybe." I forced a small laugh. "I doubt it. Probably just a mix-up." Diane studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "If you need anything, you know where I am." That night, I threw the roses in the trash. The next morning, chocolates appeared. A small, expensive-looking box of dark chocolates with no note, no explanation. Something about it made my skin prickle. I asked the landlord if he had seen anyone near my door, but he barely glanced up from his newspaper. "It's probably just a delivery mistake," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But it didn't feel like a mistake. Someone was leaving me gifts. Someone knew where I lived, and they wanted me to know it. The letters started the following week. The first one was written on simple white paper, folded neatly and slipped under my door. "You have the most beautiful smile." I read it twice, my stomach twisting. No signature, no return address. The handwriting was neat, careful, but unfamiliar. I told myself it was nothing, just some lonely stranger playing a game. I tried to ignore it. But then the second letter came. "You always stop at the same coffee shop before work. You like your coffee black, no sugar." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I did go to the same coffee shop every morning. I did drink my coffee black. Someone was watching me. My hands shook as I folded the letter, stuffing it into the drawer where I had kept the first. I went to the police that afternoon. The officer at the front desk listened as I explained the flowers, the chocolates, the letters. He nodded politely, his expression neutral. "Did the letters contain any threats?" he asked. "No, but..." "Then there's not much we can do at this point." I stared at him. "Someone is stalking me." He sighed. "I understand, but unless there's a direct threat or any evidence of trespassing, we can't take action. If anything escalates, call us immediately." I left feeling worse than when I arrived. That night, I double-checked the locks on my door. I closed my blinds. I stayed away from the windows. But no matter how safe I tried to feel, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was out there, watching, waiting. A week passed with no new letters, no flowers, no gifts. For a brief moment, I let myself believe that it was over, that whoever had been following me had grown bored and moved on. Then one evening, I came home late from work. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to take a hot shower and crawl into bed. I was halfway down the hallway when I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. My door. It was open, just slightly. A thin black gap between the frame and the wall. I stood frozen, heart hammering in my chest. I knew with absolute certainty that I had locked it before leaving that morning. Someone had been inside. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and called the police. This time, they didn't brush me off. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, stepping cautiously into my apartment with hands resting on their holsters. I waited in the hallway, too afraid to move. One of the officers returned after a few minutes. No sign of forced entry, no damage to the lock. Does anything look out of place? I stepped inside, scanning my apartment. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken. Then I saw it. On the kitchen counter, a small silver key. I walked toward it slowly, dread curling in my stomach. It wasn't one of mine. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. There were no markings, no indication of what it belonged to. The officer watched me closely. "That wasn't yours?" I shook my head. He exchanged a glance with his partner. "We'll need to take that in for evidence." I handed it to him, my hands cold. My voice barely came out. "What does it open?" The second officer cleared his throat. "We're going to find out." The next morning, I got a call. It was the police. The officer's voice was different this time, tense, serious. "You need to come down to the station." My stomach twisted. Why? What happened? There was a long pause. Then he said, "We tested the key. It fits every lock in your apartment." The air left my lungs. I barely registered the rest of what he was saying. Something about changing the locks, about taking precautions, about an ongoing investigation. All I could think about was the key. Someone had been inside my home. They had walked through my rooms, touched my things. They hadn't stolen anything. They hadn't hurt me. Because they didn't need to. They had a key. And they could come back any time they wanted. I sat in the police station, gripping a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The officers spoke in low tones across the room, their faces unreadable. I could still hear the words from the phone call echoing in my head. "We tested the key. It fits every lock in your apartment." I felt sick. Someone had been inside. Not just once, not just last night. They had been coming and going for who knows how long. A uniformed officer finally approached, sitting across from me with a notepad. His badge read Detective Harris. He was younger than I expected, late 30s, sharp-eyed. His posture tense in a way that told me he had seen cases like this before. I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "You said the key fits every lock?" He nodded. "Your front door, the windows, even the latch on the fire escape." He hesitated, then added, "It wasn't a copy of your existing key. It's a master key designed to open every door in your unit." The words landed like a punch to the gut. "A master key," I repeated, barely hearing myself. "Yes, your building uses a master key system for maintenance and emergency access. Only the landlord and a select few individuals should have one." I stared at him. "So you're telling me that whoever left it in my apartment has the same access as my landlord?" His expression darkened. "Essentially, yes." A wave of nausea rolled through me. Someone had been walking into my home whenever they wanted. Sleeping, showering, watching TV, they had been there. I took a shaky breath. "Did you check the security cameras?" His expression didn't change. "There are no cameras on your floor." I wanted to scream. I had seen security cameras in the lobby, at the entrance, even in the parking lot, but nothing in the hallways, nothing near my door. "Do you have any suspects?" I asked. "We're working on it. Your landlord is being questioned, and we're reviewing maintenance records to see who else has access to a key like this." His voice was calm, measured, but there was something else underneath. Something I didn't like. "You don't think they'll find anything, do you?" Harris exhaled slowly, tapping his pen against the table. "We're going to do everything we can, Miss Carter, but I need you to understand something. Whoever did this, they've been careful. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, no stolen property. They left the key for a reason. They wanted you to know." A cold chill crawled up my spine. He continued, "We'll have a patrol car pass by your building tonight, but my advice? Stay somewhere else for a while, at least until we get more information." I nodded, gripping my cup so tightly my fingers ached. "Is there anyone you can stay with?" I thought of my closest friend, Lauren, who lived across town. "Yes," I said. "I'll call her." "Good." He stood, closing his notepad. "If anything else happens, call us immediately." I barely remembered leaving the station. All I knew was that I was never going back to that apartment. Lauren was waiting for me when I arrived at her place. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a tight hug. "Jesus, Anna, what the hell is going on?" I barely managed to explain through the knot in my throat. The flowers, the letters, the chocolates, the police brushing it off, the key. By the time I finished, her face was pale. "You can't go back there," she said. "I won't," I muttered. She grabbed my hands. "I mean it. You can stay here as long as you need. We'll figure this out." I nodded, but my thoughts were a blur. I had spent the last 24 hours in a state of disbelief, as if this were happening to someone else. But now, standing in her warm, safe apartment, it hit me like a freight train. Someone had been living in my space. They had studied my routines. They had planned this. Lauren made tea, sat me down, and insisted I eat something. I barely tasted the food, my mind running in circles. Whoever had been in my apartment had full access. They had been inside while I was there. Maybe while I was sleeping. Maybe while I was in the shower. I felt a deep, consuming fear unlike anything I had ever known. Lauren must have noticed because she squeezed my hand. "It's okay now," she said. "You're safe." I wanted to believe her. But deep down, I knew better. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the apartment made my body tense. Every passing car outside sent my mind spiraling. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. I reached for it, my pulse quickening. A text message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. "Did you miss me?" My hands went ice cold. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then another message appeared. "You shouldn't have left." A suffocating weight pressed down on my chest. I scrambled out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Lauren stirred beside me, blinking groggily. "Anna, what's wrong?" I shoved my phone in her hands. "Read this." She frowned, still half asleep. Then her expression dropped. She sat up fast, rubbing her arms, as if shaking off the cold. "Did you block the number?" I swallowed hard. "Number I don't know if I should." Lauren's eyes were sharp now, fully awake. "Anna, listen to me. We're calling the police, right now." I nodded, grabbing my phone with trembling hands. Before I could dial, another text came in. "It doesn't matter where you go. I have a key." My stomach twisted into knots. I hit the call button. The operator answered, and I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm being stalked. He broke into my apartment. The police already know, but I just got a message." They transferred me to an officer. I barely processed his words, only catching pieces of the conversation. Phone number, trace, investigation, patrols. But all I could think about was the text. "It doesn't matter where you go." Whoever he wasn't just watching me. He wanted me to know that he was watching, that he was always close, that no lock could keep him out. Lauren locked the door, double-checking the deadbolt while I sat frozen on the couch, staring at my phone. The words on the screen still sent ice through my veins. "It doesn't matter where you go. I have a key." The police dispatcher had assured me that an officer would come by to take a report, but their voices sounded distant, almost unconvincing. They would look into it. They would investigate further. But deep down, I knew they were just adding my name to a growing pile of cases that rarely saw resolution. Lauren sat beside me, her body tense. "Did you block the number?" I shook my head. What if they call again? What if it's a clue? "Anna," she said softly, "this isn't a game. He's not going to confess over text. He's messing with you because he knows it's working." I exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. Maybe she was right. Maybe blocking the number would take back some control. But the thought of shutting off the only link I had to whoever was doing this terrified me. A loud knock at the door made us both jump. I grabbed Lauren's wrist, heart racing. The knock came again, firm, deliberate. Lauren stood, peering through the peephole. "It's the cops," she said, relief evident in her voice. I forced myself to breathe. Lauren unlatched the door, stepping aside as two uniformed officers entered. The older one, a burly man with gray at his temples, introduced himself as Sergeant Nolan. His partner, a younger officer with sharp eyes, gave me a curt nod. "We're here about the messages," Nolan said, glancing at my phone. "Can you show us?" I handed it over, my fingers still shaking. He scrolled through the texts, his jaw tightening. "This guy isn't just watching you," he muttered. "He's enjoying it." His partner, Officer Lane, frowned. "Have you noticed anyone following you? Any new faces in your building? Maintenance workers?" I shook my head. "Number, I barely know my neighbors." Nolan crossed his arms. "The key we found in your apartment, it was new. Not an old copy. Someone had it made recently." I blinked. "So, does that mean it wasn't my landlord?" "We can't say for sure yet," Lane replied. "But it's unlikely. Most landlords don't go through the trouble of making unauthorized master keys." Lauren rubbed her arms. "So, what now? You can't just tell her to go back there." Nolan's face hardened. "Number, you're not going back." For the first time that night, I felt a sliver of relief. He handed my phone back. "We've already requested a warrant for your building's maintenance records. If anyone's been ordering extra keys, we'll know soon." Lane stepped toward the door. "In the meantime, you stay here. If he contacts you again, call us immediately." I nodded. "Okay." Nolan gave me a small, reassuring pat on the shoulder before following his partner out. Lauren locked the door behind them. She turned to me, her face unreadable. "Anna, you should stay here permanently. I mean it. We'll figure it out, but you're not going back there." I didn't argue, because she was right. The next few days passed in a haze. I barely ate, barely slept. Every sound outside made my skin crawl. Lauren stayed with me as much as she could, but she had work, and when I was alone, the silence was unbearable. The police hadn't called. Every hour that passed with no new information felt like a countdown. Then, on the fourth night, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. My hands trembled as I answered. Silence. Then, a low, shallow breath. I felt my body go rigid. Then the voice. Soft, calm, too familiar. You shouldn't have left. My breath hitched. I couldn't speak. I miss you, Anna. A sharp click. The line went dead. I nearly dropped the phone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I felt like the walls were closing in. Then I did the only thing I could. I called Nolan. They traced the call. It had come from inside my apartment building. Not from a cell phone, but from a landline. Someone was in there, Nolan told me. Someone who knows you're gone. I clutched my arms, trying to stay upright. Lauren was pacing, barely holding herself together. So what? You still don't have a suspect? Nolan exhaled through his nose. Actually, we do. I lifted my head. Who? Your building's handyman. I frowned. Who? His name is Curtis Reynolds. Been working there for about 6 years. No criminal record, but when we checked the maintenance logs, we found something interesting. Lauren stopped pacing. What? He put in an order for a master key 3 months ago. Said he lost his original. The request was approved without much thought. A cold realization sank in. He's been in my apartment for 3 months. My voice was barely a whisper. Nolan nodded grimly. We just picked him up. He didn't resist. When we searched his place, we found something else. He pulled a folder from his bag, flipping it open. Photographs. Dozens of them. All of me. Taken at the coffee shop, the grocery store, my front door. Lauren cursed under her breath. I covered my mouth, a wave of nausea hitting me. Then Nolan turned the page. More photos. But these were different. They were taken from inside my apartment. I gripped the table to keep myself steady. Lauren whispered, Jesus Christ. I swallowed hard. What else did you find? Nolan hesitated. Then he said, a key, the same one we found in your apartment. He had a second one. I felt like I was sinking. So if I had gone back, you wouldn't have been alone, Nolan finished. The weight of those words pressed down on me. Curtis Reynolds, the quiet handyman, the man who had walked past me in the halls countless times. He had been waiting, watching, planning, and if I hadn't left, I would have woken up one night with him already inside. Curtis pled guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. He had no explanation for what he had done, no real remorse. Just a blank stare and an obsession he had let consume him. I never set foot in that apartment again. The locks were changed. My belongings were packed and moved out. But even now, I struggle to sleep without checking the doors 5 times. I no longer trust the sound of a lock clicking into place. Because I learned something terrifying. Locks only work when you're the only one with the key. And if someone wants to get in badly enough, they'll find a way. I never thought I'd be the type to get spooked easily. I've always considered myself pragmatic, grounded in reality, unwilling to entertain paranoia. But if there's one thing I've learned in the past week, it's that some fears aren't irrational. I moved into this house 6 months ago. It was my first real step toward independence after leaving a long-term relationship. The breakup hadn't been messy, just overdue. We both knew it, but I'd clung to the familiar for longer than I should have. When I finally signed the lease for this place, a modest single-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I felt something close to relief. A fresh start, a space that was entirely mine. The house itself was nothing spectacular, but it was enough. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, a driveway just wide enough for my car. The neighborhood was eerily still at night, which I found peaceful at first. After years of city life, the absence of sirens and distant chatter felt almost unnatural, but I adjusted. Because I lived alone, I took security seriously. I had a Ring doorbell camera installed the week I moved in, along with deadbolts and motion-activated lights. It wasn't paranoia, just common sense. I liked the idea of knowing who was outside before answering the door, and the notifications reassured me. For the first few months, the footage was uneventful, just passing cars, stray cats, and the occasional neighbor retrieving their mail. Then, last Wednesday, I got the first notification. It was 3:13 a.m. I woke to the soft chime of my phone alerting me to motion detected at the front door. Half asleep, I reached for my phone, expecting to see the usual: a car driving by, a possum rustling through the bushes. Instead, I saw him. A man standing perfectly still at the edge of my porch. His posture was unsettling, unnaturally rigid, his arms hanging limply at his sides. He wasn't facing the door, not directly. His head was tilted downward, chin just slightly tucked in, as if he were looking at the camera through his brow. I stared at the image, my pulse beginning to thud dully in my ears. There was something profoundly unsettling about his stillness. He wasn't shifting his weight, wasn't adjusting his stance. He just stood there. I watched for several minutes, expecting him to move, to ring the doorbell, to knock, but he never did. After what felt like forever, I turned on the microphone feature and spoke, my voice groggy but firm. "Can I help you?" The man didn't react. I watched the screen, waiting for even the smallest movement, a flinch, a turn of the head, but he remained utterly motionless. A cold, prickling sensation crawled up my spine. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Sir, are you okay?" Nothing. Then, as if someone had pressed fast forward on a tape, he turned and walked away. The suddenness of his movement jarred me. He didn't pause, didn't hesitate, just turned on his heel and strode off into the night, disappearing past the edge of my camera's frame. I sat there, staring at the now empty porch, my mind racing. What the hell was that? A lost drunk? Someone with a mental illness? A harmless, albeit creepy stranger? That's what I told myself, as I forced my racing heart to slow. By morning, it almost felt like a dream. The next night, I got the notification again. 3:12 a.m. I sat up so fast my vision swam. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I pulled up the live feed, already knowing what I would see. He was back. But this time he was closer, standing one step closer to my front door than the night before. My stomach twisted as I took in his posture, exactly the same. Arms loose at his sides, shoulders unnaturally slack, his head tilted just enough to give the impression that he was watching me through the camera. I felt an unfamiliar sting of fear in my chest. This wasn't just a lost traveler or a confused stranger. This was intentional. I turned on the microphone again, my voice sharper now. "Who are you?" He didn't move, didn't react. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even. "You need to leave." Still, nothing. Then, after another long, unbearable moment, he walked away. Same as before. The moment I spoke, he turned and left. I barely slept that night. By morning, my rational brain was at war with my instincts. I tried to brush it off as coincidence. Maybe he was harmless. Maybe he was a sleepwalker. Maybe nothing. Something wasn't right. I debated calling the police, but what would I say? That a man stood silently outside my door 2 nights in a row. That wasn't a crime. Not yet. So instead, I did what any anxious person would do. I stayed up the next night, waiting. I kept my phone next to me, screen brightness dimmed, the Ring app open. I forced myself to keep the lights off, hoping to avoid drawing attention. As 3 a.m. neared, my heartbeat felt like a drum against my ribs. Then the notification. My breath caught in my throat. Motion detected at your front door. Hands trembling, I tapped the notification, my pulse roaring in my ears. The feed loaded. My stomach turned to ice. He was even closer. This time, he stood directly in front of my door. A single foot away. My skin went cold. His face. I could see his face, this time. But something was wrong. His mouth was slightly open. His lips parted just enough that I could see the gleam of teeth. I had the strangest, most irrational thought as he smiling. I didn't speak this time. I just watched, waiting, holding my breath. Then his head tilted. It was so subtle, so slow, that at first I thought I imagined it. But no, he was moving, just slightly, leaning toward the camera, like he was trying to hear something. I couldn't take it anymore. I flipped on my porch light. The instant the light flooded the area, he bolted. No hesitation, no slow, eerie retreat like before. He turned and ran. Fast. I barely caught the blur of his movement before he vanished into the night. My fingers were already dialing 911. I didn't care if it wasn't technically a crime. I wasn't waiting for it to become one. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers, both looking more irritated than concerned, as if they had expected a drunken disturbance or a false alarm. I didn't care, I just wanted someone to listen. I met them outside, arms crossed over my chest, trying to suppress the nervous tremor in my hands. I replayed everything, from the first night's footage to the way he ran the moment the porch light turned on. One of the officers, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, jotted notes in a small pad. The other, younger and lankier, sighed audibly. So, he didn't try to break in? No, I admitted, but my voice hardened. That doesn't mean this is normal. The older officer gave a small nod. You have the footage? I pulled up the videos on my phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I played them. The younger cop leaned in first, frowning at the eerie stillness of the man on screen. The first night, then the second when he was closer. Finally, I showed them the most recent clip where he stood directly in front of my door. When the man on screen tilted his head ever so slightly, the older cop exhaled, shifting on his feet. Okay, he muttered. The younger one, still skeptical, crossed his arms. He could just be casing the place. I shook my head. Then why didn't he try to get in? Why hasn't he knocked, spoken, done anything except stand there? Neither of them had an answer. The older cop sighed. We'll file a report, but there's not much we can do unless he actually commits a crime. I clenched my jaw, already knowing that was going to be their response. What if he comes back? Call us, the younger one said, and maybe leave the porch light on. It seemed to scare him off. I wanted to scream. That's it? That's all they had? But arguing wouldn't change anything. They did a quick sweep of my yard, shining their flashlights along the fence line, but they didn't find anything, no footprints, no signs that someone had been lurking for hours. Just like that, they left. I watched their taillights disappear down the street, then turned back to my house. My front door suddenly looked different. Thinner, weaker, like it wouldn't do a damn thing to stop him if he really wanted in. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in my living room, curled up on the couch, my laptop open with a fresh Google search staring back at me. How to get rid of a stalker. The results were frustratingly vague. Get security cameras, I already had one. Install better lock stun. Call the police, I had. And it got me nowhere. The best advice? Leave. I hated that answer. This was my home. I wasn't going to let some unhinged stranger drive me out of it. But when I checked my phone around 3 a.m., the breath left my lungs. Motion detected at your front door. I nearly dropped my phone. My fingers moved on their own, opening the Ring app, my vision narrowing to the small screen. The feed loaded. My blood turned to ice. He was back, but he wasn't standing at the door anymore. He was crouched. His body was lowered to the ground, his face inches from the camera. My breath caught in my throat. His mouth was open slightly wider than before. His eyes, too wide, stared directly into the lens. I felt like he could see me, like he knew I was watching. The camera had audio recording on by default, but I had never heard anything on the previous clips. Tonight was different. I turned up the volume and nearly dropped my phone. He was whispering. I couldn't make out the words at first, just a low, murmuring hum, like he was talking to himself. Then suddenly his voice became clear. The notification sat on my screen like a warning I wasn't ready to face. Motion detected in your backyard. I stared at the words, my mind momentarily blank, my body frozen in place. The house felt too quiet. The air around me had a thickness to it, like the silence itself was waiting for me to react. My hand trembled as I tapped the notification. The video feed loaded. My stomach lurched. There he was, standing at the far end of my backyard, just barely visible in the grainy glow of the porch light. He wasn't at the door this time. He had gone around. For the first time, I could see his entire body. He was thin, too thin. His clothes looked baggy, almost oversized, like they didn't belong to him. His hands hung loosely at his sides, his fingers slightly curled. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if his neck couldn't quite hold the weight. And then, slow deliberately, he stepped forward. Not fast. Not running. Just walking. Straight toward my house. A sharp pang of panic hit me square in the chest, snapping me out of my trance. I scrambled out of bed, my pulse thudding in my ears as I rushed to the window overlooking the yard, my breath caught in my throat. The back porch light was still on. The camera feed hadn't glitched. He was real. He was there. And he was closer than before. My body acted before my brain did. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. It rang once. Twice. Then, bang. The sound rattled through the house. I let out a choked gasp, my hands tightening around the phone. The operator's voice came through. 911, what's your emergency? My voice came out, ragged, breathless. I turned back to the window. He was gone. I blinked rapidly, my vision scanning the yard. The spot where he'd been standing was empty. No sign of movement, no retreating figure, nothing. The operator's voice came again. Hello? I swallowed, forcing myself to speak. Someone's in my backyard. The words felt foreign, like I wasn't the one saying them, like I was still trying to convince myself this was actually happening. Are they attempting to enter your home? I didn't know. My hands shook violently as I flipped through my camera feeds. Front door? Clear. Side yard? Empty. Backyard? No one there. But that didn't make sense. Where the hell did he go? The only way out of the backyard was through the gate or over the fence, and I hadn't heard either move. Officers are en route, the operator said, her tone calm but firm. Stay inside. Do not engage with them. I barely muttered a response before hanging up. Then, cautiously, I made my way toward the back door. Every instinct in my body was screaming, don't. But I had to see. I kept the porch light on, my fingers hovering over the deadbolt. My other hand gripped the baseball bat I had grabbed from my closetta, useless weapon, but still, something. My breath felt too loud in the silence. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Darkness. Nothing but the faint glow of the porch light bouncing off the wooden fence. Where the hell did he go? Then, a tap. I nearly dropped the bat. A soft, rhythmic tap coming from the side of the house. I turned, my stomach twisting. My side window. Slowly, hesitantly, I crept toward it, my pulse hammering in my ears. The window had blinds, partially drawn, leaving just an inch of open space at the bottom. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I leaned forward, just enough to see through the small gap. And there he was. His face, right up against the glass. My breath hitched, my entire body seized with cold, gut-wrenching terror. He was grinning. A wide, unnatural grin stretched across his too thin face. His lips were parted slightly, just enough to show his teeth. And his eyes, they weren't right. Not crazed, not angry, just focused, intentional. Like he was enjoying this. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped. My shoulders slammed against the wall, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Then sirens. The sudden wail of police sirens tore through the quiet night. Red and blue lights flashed through my windows. And just like that, he was gone. The cops didn't find him. Again. They searched the entire property, the surrounding yards, even a few blocks down the street. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. Like he had vanished. I stood outside, wrapped in a blanket, my entire body still shaking violently. One of the officers, the same sharp-eyed woman from before, approached me. "Are you absolutely sure it was the same man?" I shot her a look. I saw his face. Her expression stayed neutral, but something behind her eyes shifted. "You need to stay somewhere else for a few nights," she said. I shook my head. "I have nowhere else to go." She hesitated, then sighed. "We'll do extra patrols in the area. But listen, whoever this guy is, he's not just watching anymore. He's pushing boundaries." A cold pit formed in my stomach. Next time, he might not run. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my living room, bat in hand, staring at the locked doors, waiting for another notification. None came. Morning finally arrived, and with it, a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. I spent the day researching emergency security upgrades. I scheduled an installation for the next morning. Reinforced locks, motion sensors inside, a second camera facing the backyard. I wasn't taking chances anymore. By nightfall, I felt exhausted but prepared. Then, just before midnight, someone knocked on my door. I froze. Not the ring notification, not motion detected. A knock. Soft, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone, pulling up the camera feed. My stomach dropped. There was no one there. The porch was empty, but the knocking continued. 3 steady taps. And then, from behind me, tap, tap, tap. From the backyard, the knocking didn't stop. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat, the weight of silence pressing down on me. 3 knocks, from the front door. 3 more, from the backyard. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The ring feed still showed nothing. No movement, no figures, no one was there. But I heard it. I felt it. The cold, inescapable reality that I was not alone. A slow, sickening realization crept in. He wasn't just testing my fear anymore. He was playing with it. I forced my body to move. My limbs felt sluggish, weighed down by the pulse of panic flooding my veins. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind screaming, "Do something." I tightened my grip on the bat in my other hand, my breath unsteady as I turned toward the back window. The knocking had stopped. I peered through the blinds, keeping my movements slow, careful. The backyard light was still on. The camera feed had no motion detected. But I could feel him. My stomach twisted painfully. I tapped 911 again, my voice hushed but urgent. He's back. He's knocking on both sides. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. Officers are on their way. Stay inside. Keep all doors and windows locked. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Then a sound cut through the silence. The doorknob rattled. My breath hitched. I turned, my body rigid, my eyes locked on the front door. The handle twisted, slowly, carefully, as if testing for weakness. I couldn't breathe. This was different. This wasn't just standing and watching. This was him trying to come inside. My entire body screamed to run. But to where? There was nowhere to go. I raised the bat, my hands trembling. I backed away, inch by inch, toward the kitchen. If he got in, I needed something better than a bat. A knife, something sharp, something that could stop him. The doorknob stopped rattling. Silence. I held my breath. Then I heard it. A whisper. Low, almost too faint to make out. I see you. My stomach dropped. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from inside the house. My body locked up. Number. No. That wasn't possible. I spun, my eyes scanning the dimly lit space behind me. The hallway stretched into shadows, leading to the bedroom and the second, smaller guest room. The air felt heavy, thick, like I was being watched. I gripped the bat so tightly my hands ached. A faint creak echoed down the hall. From the guest room, my throat went dry. I had locked everything. Hadn't I? I forced my legs to move, my steps cautious, deliberate. Every inch of my skin prickled with the overwhelming sensation that something was wrong. I reached the guest room door. It was open, just an inch. The way it always was when I walked past it at night. I had never thought much of it before. Now it felt like a trap. I braced myself, raised the bat. Then, with a sharp breath, I kicked the door wide open. The room was dark. Still, empty. My pulse thundered. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to look around. The closet was closed, the window locked. I took a step forward, then another. My breath was uneven, my nerves frayed. I reached for the closet handle, one last place to check. Then something moved. A low, rustling sound. Not in the closet. Not behind me. Above me. In the vent. My chest constricted. The vent cover was loose, just barely. Like it had been shifted recently. I stared, horrified, as the realization hit me like a tidal wave. He had been inside the house all along. I didn't have time to think. I turned and ran. I barely made it 3 steps before something crashed behind me, a sudden violent sound metal hitting the floor. He was coming down. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the front door, my lungs burning, my fingers fumbling with the locks. Then sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The police. A sharp, heavy thud sounded from behind me. I felt the air shift as someone moved fast. The officers burst through the door. I turned, my vision blurring, my chest heaving. He was gone. The vent cover lay on the ground. The small, narrow opening gaped like a tunnel leading into darkness. But he was nowhere in sight. The officers moved fast, weapons drawn, clearing the house room by room. Then, from the hallway, one of them shouted, "The attic hatch is open." My stomach clenched. They found him. The next moments were a blur yelling, stomping boots, the sharp crack of wood splitting as they pulled someone down. And then a face. His face. Thin, hollow. His skin stretched tightly over his cheekbones. His clothes were stained, torn in places. He looked like he hadn't been outside in weeks. And his eyes, they were locked on me. Even as the officers pinned him down, even as they hauled him away in cuffs, she never stopped staring. His mouth twitched. Then, just before they dragged him out the door, he whispered soft, knowing, like a secret just for me. I was inside for a long time. They found a makeshift space in the attic. A small, disgusting nest of blankets, empty water bottles, food wrappers. He had been living above me, watching, listening, slipping in and out without me ever knowing. The worst part, they found a notebook filled with pages of observations about me, my schedule, what time I went to bed, what nights I left the house, and in one entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, soon. I moved out immediately, sold the house, left everything behind. Even now, months later, I still can't sleep without checking the vents, without checking the locks, the doors, the ceilings. Because the truth is, I don't think he ever wanted to break in. I think he was waiting for me to find him. And I had, just in time. I never used to be paranoid. I always rolled my eyes when my mom warned me about strangers on the internet, her voice laced with that tired parental concern. Don't talk to people you don't know, don't share personal details, and for God's sake, don't meet up with anyone. I'd heard it a million times, and I thought I was careful. My social media was private. I only accepted friend requests from people I knew, and my location settings were turned off. I was just another teenage girl posting stupid selfies, venting about school and sharing funny memes. Nothing that should have stood out, nothing that should have caught someone's attention. But I was wrong. The first message came late one night while I was scrolling through Instagram in bed. "You looked really pretty in that red sweater today." I frowned. My last post had been from last weekend, and I wasn't wearing red in any of my pictures. I checked the username, user 984,721. No profile picture, no posts. Just an empty account. I dismissed it as a troll and ignored it. The next day, another message. "I saw you walking home. You always take the long way, don't you?" A strange, hollow feeling settled in my chest. I did take the long way home sometimes, but only when I wanted to clear my head after school. I never told anyone that. It wasn't a route I took regularly, just something I did on impulse. I showed my best friend Rachel at lunch. "Probably some loser trying to mess with you," she said, popping a chip into her mouth. "Just block them." So I did. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That night I got a text from an unknown number. "Blocking me won't make me stop watching, Lily." My stomach flipped. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I checked the number, no name, no caller ID, just a string of digits I didn't recognize. I took a deep breath and typed back, "Who is this?" The response was almost immediate. "A friend." I didn't reply. The next morning, I double-checked all my social media accounts. My Instagram was still private. My Snapchat location was turned off. There was no way a stranger could have been keeping track of me. But someone was. At school, I tried to act normal. I sat with Rachel at lunch, joked around with my friends, and forced myself to focus in class. But my eyes kept flicking toward the door, the windows, the people around me. I started noticing things I hadn't before. A dark blue sedan parked near the school entrance, the same one I thought I'd seen near my neighborhood. A man in the grocery store who seemed to be in every aisle I was. The feeling of someone standing too close behind me at the coffee shop. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. Or maybe it wasn't. That night, I got another text. You should really lock your bedroom window. I dropped my phone. My stomach twisted violently. I had left my window unlocked. It was something I barely thought about. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked during the day. Hands shaking, I ran to my window. It was closed, but when I tried to slide the lock into place, I felt the smallest resistance, like it had been moved recently. I slammed it shut and locked it. Then I grabbed my phone and typed out a message. "Who the hell are you?" No response. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house, every shadow from the street lights outside sent my heart racing. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another message, waiting for something. The next morning, my mom found me staring blankly at my cereal. "You okay, sweetheart?" I almost told her, almost, but I didn't want to worry her. She had enough on her plate with work and my little brother. And besides, what would I even say? "Hey, Mom, I think someone is watching me." So I forced a smile, just tired. That day at school, I noticed something new. A small, wrapped box sitting in my locker. No note, no name. I hesitated before picking it up, my stomach churning with unease. It was light, barely weighing anything at all. Rachel leaned over my shoulder. "Ooh, secret admirer." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, right." I unwrapped it slowly, heart pounding. Inside was a single item, a hair clip. A very specific hair clip. The kind I had lost a month ago. I hadn't mentioned losing it online, hadn't talked about it to anyone. I barely even remembered it was missing. But someone had found it. Someone had kept it. I felt sick. Rachel was still peering over my shoulder. "Cute. Who do you think it's from?" I shoved the box back into my locker. I don't know. I did my best to act normal the rest of the day, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I got home, I locked every door and window in the house. That night, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But I had to. "You look so beautiful when you're scared, Lily." I dropped the phone and ran to my bedroom mirror. I had been home alone for hours. No one should have seen me. And yet, they had. I didn't tell anyone. I should have, but some deep, gut-wrenching part of me thought that saying it out loud would make it worse, like acknowledging it would give this person more power over me. I told myself that if I ignored them, if I stopped reacting, maybe they'd get bored, maybe they'd stop watching. But they didn't. I deleted my social media the next morning, Instagram, Snapchat, even my barely used Facebook. I changed my phone number, made sure every window and door was locked, and refused to go anywhere alone. I wasn't an idiot. I knew this wasn't some harmless prank. This was someone who knew my habits, my home, my secrets. And they weren't going away. For the first time in my life, I felt trapped in my own skin. At school, I kept my head down, stomach churning with anxiety every time I felt someone's gaze linger too long. It wasn't just paranoia caught people looking at me, but I couldn't tell if it meant anything. Was it just normal teenage curiosity, or was one of them the person behind the messages? Rachel noticed. "Okay, what's going on with you?" she asked at lunch, flicking a fry at me. "You've been weird for days." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to unload everything, tell her about the messages, the gifts, the feeling of being hunted. But how do you say something like that without sounding insane? "I'm just stressed," I lied. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Sure." I forced a smile. "Really, it's nothing." She didn't look convinced, but thankfully, she let it drop. That night, my mom worked late, so I was home alone. My little brother was at a friend's house, and our usually lively home was eerily silent. I checked the locks twice, shut every curtain, and curled up in bed with my laptop, trying to distract myself with Netflix. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number, again. My stomach tightened as I hesitated before picking it up. Did you really think deleting your accounts would make me stop watching? I felt sick. My fingers shook as I typed back. Who the hell are you? What do you want? I watched the typing bubble appear, disappear, then return. I just want you to appreciate me the way I appreciate you. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. I don't know you. A pause. Then, but I know you, Lily. I know everything about you. I couldn't breathe. I threw my phone onto the bed and stood up, pacing my room. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and did the only thing I could think of. I looked up how to track a phone number. Most sites were useless, just ads for paid services that probably wouldn't work. But after an hour of digging, I found one that let me trace general locations of incoming messages. It wasn't exact, but it would tell me the city, maybe even the neighborhood. My fingers trembled as I entered the number. Loading. My breath caught. The location popped up. My town. I felt like I was going to throw up. This person wasn't some stranger in another state. They were here. I stared at my screen, mind racing. Who could it be? A classmate, a teacher, a neighbor. A sound outside made me jump. Footsteps on the porch. My heart pounded. I grabbed my phone, creeping toward the window. A small wrapped box sat on the doorstep. I felt the blood drain from my face. I stared at it for a long time, my body frozen. I knew I shouldn't open it. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it away, to pretend it wasn't there. But I had to know. I stepped outside, my skin prickling with fear as I bent down to pick it up. The air was cool, silent. The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty road. Whoever left it was already gone. I unwrapped it slowly, hands shaking. Inside was a necklace. A necklace I had lost 6 months ago. I gasped, my vision blurring. My mind reeled, trying to remember where I had last seen it. It had been at Rachel's house. I had taken it off in her room, left it on her dresser. We searched for it for weeks, tearing apart her bedroom, but it was just gone. Until now. I dropped the box, my pulse hammering in my ears. I backed inside, locked the door, and ran straight to my room, grabbing my phone. I needed proof. Whoever was doing this was getting bolder. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were inside my life. I took a deep breath and did something I should have done from the beginning. I set up a camera. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old webcam I hadn't used in years. I plugged it into my laptop, pointed it at the porch, and set it to record. If they left something again, I would catch them. I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. I clutched my phone under the covers, fighting the urge to text Rachel, to call my mom, to do something. But I was done feeling helpless. The next morning, I checked the footage. Nothing. No movement, no shadows, no figures creeping in the dark. I exhaled slowly, my body aching from exhaustion. Maybe, just maybe, they were done. Then my phone buzzed. I picked it up, dreading what I'd see. You looked so cute checking the camera this morning." My vision blurred. My stomach clenched painfully. I hadn't checked the footage in the morning. I'd done it just now. They knew. They had seen me. And that meant... I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The camera. It was pointed at the porch. The only way they could have known was if they were watching me from inside the house. I couldn't move. My skin was cold, my breath shallow, my pulse a distant, frantic drum in my ears. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just watching me. They were inside. I stood frozen in place, every muscle in my body locked in terror. My bedroom door was closed. My closet door was closed. My window was locked. And yet, I felt them. Watching. Waiting. I forced myself to move, slowly, silently, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The call barely rang once before the line clicked. A voice spoke. Not the operator. Them. "You shouldn't have tried to catch me, Lily." I dropped the phone. My body moved before I could think. I grabbed the nearest objecta-heavy bedside lamp and turned, my back against the wall, scanning every darkened corner of my room. My closet, my desk, the space beneath my bed, they could be anywhere. I bolted. I threw open my door and ran down the hall, nearly tripping over my own feet. I needed to get out. I needed to get out now. My front door was just at the bottom of the stairs. If I could make it outside, I could scream, run to the neighbors, get someone to. A sound stopped me cold. The creak of a floorboard. It was soft, deliberate. It came from behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body refused to move, every nerve screaming at me to keep running, to keep going. But my mind told me I had to see. Slowly, I turned my head. There, standing at the top of the stairs, was him. I expected a stranger, some nameless, faceless monster lurking in the shadows. But I was wrong. I knew him. My best friend's dad, Mr. Caldwell. He was wearing the same warm smile I had seen 1,000 times before, the same friendly, fatherly face that had watched me and Rachel since we were kids. But now, it was wrong. Twisted. There was something in his eyes I had never seen before, something hungry, something sick. "I didn't want it to be like this," he said softly, stepping forward. I backed down a step. "Stay away from me." "You weren't supposed to figure it out," he continued, ignoring me. His voice was calm, patient, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "You were supposed to love me, Lily, the way I love you." A sickening wave of nausea rolled through me. Love. Oh God. Oh God. I could barely process what he was saying. My mind was screaming at me to run, to fight, but I was frozen. "You were so perfect," he murmured, "so sweet, so innocent. I've been watching you for so long, making sure you were safe, keeping you close." My mouth was dry. My voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" He tilted his head, smiling almost sadly. "Because I knew one day you'd belong to me." I turned and ran. I flew down the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quick, too quick, was chasing me. I hit the front door and yanked at the lock. It didn't budge. Oh God. The deadbolt. He had locked the deadbolt from the inside. I fumbled, my fingers slipping, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I could hear him getting closer, feel the air shift as he reached for me. And then the house alarm blared. A deafening, piercing screech. I hadn't even realized I hit the panic button on the keypad, but I had, and it was loud. Louder than my fear. Louder than him. I heard him snarl a low, frustrated growl I had never imagined coming from him. I turned, just in time to see him stumbling back, eyes darting toward the windows, the flashing lights from outside. He hesitated. I didn't. I unlocked the door and ran. I didn't stop running, not even when I reached the neighbor's porch, not even when they opened the door, eyes wide with confusion and fear. I didn't stop until I was inside, until I collapsed onto their floor, sobbing and shaking as they called the police. They caught him that night. Mr. Caldwell was found hiding in my house, tucked away in the attic crawl space where he had been living for weeks. Watching me, listening, waiting. The police found his laptop, his phone, hundreds of photos of me, screenshots of my social media posts, my texts with Rachel. He had been reading everything. He had been inside our lives in ways I never imagined. Rachel. I broke down when I saw her. She hadn't known. Of course she hadn't. She sobbed when she found out, horrified, disgusted. Her father. Her father had been stalking me. Her father had been the monster in my walls. He had been taken away in cuffs, his face blank, emotionless, like he didn't understand why we were all so upset. The trial was quick, the evidence overwhelming. He was sentenced to 20 years for stalking, breaking and entering, and intent to harm. Rachel never spoke to him again. Neither did I. But sometimes I think about that night, about how wrong I was. I thought stalkers were faceless strangers in dark alleys, lurking in shadows, following from a distance. But they aren't. They can be the people closest to you. The ones who smile at you across the dinner table. The ones you trust. I don't post online anymore. I don't talk to strangers. And every single night, I check the locks. Twice. The first thing I did when we arrived at the villa was throw open the curtains and let the Mediterranean light pour in. The room felt warm, golden, like the kind of place you'd dream of but never expect to actually stand in. Outside, the cliffs of Positano tumbled down to the sea, and the water stretched so far it seemed unreal, an oil painting come to life. I pressed my forehead against the glass, breathing it in. This is exactly what we needed. Behind me, Daniel groaned, already dropping his bags by the bed. 1,000 photos incoming. You know me too well. I had spent months planning this tripevery detail, down to the exact cafes I wanted to visit and the hidden gem restaurants that didn't show up in basic Google searches. It was our first real vacation, a break from our tiny, cluttered apartment and the dull hum of daily life. Daniel stretched out on the bed, sighing dramatically. Nap first, then food. Walk first, I corrected. Just a short one, just to get a feel for the town. He grumbled but followed me out anyway. Positano felt alive in a way our city never did. Its streets tangled and winding, full of tiny staircases that led to nowhere, bursts of bougainvillea climbing up old stone walls. I stopped every few minutes to take a photo of a fisherman mending his net, of an old woman peeling oranges on a doorstep, of market stalls spilling over with bright woven fabrics and ceramic plates. Daniel had long since given up on hurrying me along. He stood at my side as I framed a shot of the town square, waiting while I adjusted the focus. Click. I barely noticed the man in the background. That night we ate by the water under glowing string lights, the kind of meal that felt endless, filled with laughter and slow sips of wine. By the time we walked back to the villa, I was lightheaded and happy, Daniel's hand warm in mine. The next few days blurred into a routine morning spent lingering over cappuccinos, afternoons hiking to old ruins or swimming in the bluest water I had ever seen. Every night, I sat cross-legged on the bed, combing through the day's photos, adjusting the contrast, playing with the light. And then, on the third night, I saw him. At first, I didn't even register it. I was scrolling through the shots absent-mindedly when something in the background caught my eye. In the middle of the market square, behind the crowd, stood a man. Not strange on its own. The town was filled with tourists. But then I found him again. In another photo, taken from the cliffs above, he was at the edge of the frame, just slightly out of focus, the same dark jacket, the same odd posture. Again, near the marina, standing just behind a group of people waiting for a boat. Again, near the cathedral steps, his face turned just enough that I couldn't make out the details. A chill crawled up my spine. "Everything okay?" Daniel's voice made me jump. I hesitated, then turned the screen toward him. This guy keeps showing up in my photos. Daniel leaned in, barely paying attention. Maybe he's part of a tour group, same itinerary as us. I frowned. Maybe. But something felt wrong. The next morning, I started paying attention. At breakfast, I studied every face in the cafe. When we hiked up to an old watchtower, I scanned the crowd, searching, but I never saw him. By the time we boarded the ferry to Capri, I had almost convinced myself I was overreacting. And then I saw him again. I wasn't even looking for him this time. I had been taking a picture of the waves crashing against the side of the boat when I spotted him on the lower deck, standing near the railing. My stomach twisted. He was facing me this time. I grabbed Daniel's sleeve, my voice low. "He's here." Daniel followed my gaze. "Who?" "The guy," I said, fumbling to zoom in on my camera screen. "Look." He squinted at the photo, then at the deck below. No one was there. "Soph, you're freaking yourself out." I shook my head. He was just there. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Maybe you just saw someone who looked like him." But I knew. That night, after another dinner where I barely tasted the food, I uploaded the photos to my laptop. I needed a clearer look. I adjusted the lighting, sharpened the image. And then I noticed something that made my breath catch. The photos weren't just from this trip. I scrolled further back, a month ago at the lake. There, a shadowed figure near the water's edge. Further back, a friend's wedding. In the background, standing too still. Further, Christmas. At the edge of a crowded party, turned away, just enough that his face wasn't visible. A cold sweat prickled along my skin. Daniel wandered in from the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulders. "You're still on that?" I turned the laptop toward him, my hands shaking. He frowned, leaning in. "Wait, is that from before we even left?" I nodded, my throat dry. The room felt too quiet, too still. Daniel swallowed. His voice came out lower this time. "Okay." A long pause. "That's not normal." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the balcony doors. I never slept that night. Not in the way people say when they toss and turn, drifting in and out. I mean, I didn't sleep. At all. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind conjured him standing in the doorway, just beyond the curtain, or worse, at the foot of the bed, watching. I kept the laptop open on my nightstand, the photos still glowing on the screen. Maybe I thought that if I stared at them long enough, I'd figure it out. Maybe there was a logical explanation. A trick of the light, some strange coincidence, something I could explain away in the morning. But the more I looked, the more certain I became. It wasn't a coincidence. He was there, always there. Not just in the background, not just some passing stranger. In every photo, no matter the setting, no matter the time, he was always positioned the same way, just slightly apart from the crowd, just outside the natural flow of things. Like an afterthought, an anomaly. And the worst part? His face was never clear. It wasn't pixelation. It wasn't motion blur. It was deliberate. Every single time something obscured him, his head turned at the last second, the brim of a hat, a shadow falling perfectly across his features. I felt sick. Daniel had fallen asleep hours ago, his arm draped lazily across my waist, his breathing steady. I envied how easily he could shut things out, how quickly he had dismissed it as nothing. I slid out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him. My chest was tight, an anxious energy pressing against my ribs. I needed air. The villa had a small balcony that overlooked the cliffs, and I stepped onto it, wrapping my arms around myself. The night air was thick with salt and the distant hum of the sea. The town below was mostly quiet now, the last remnants of the evening settling into silence. I let out a slow breath, staring at the darkened streets. Maybe I was spiraling. Maybe I had let my paranoia get the best of me. And then I saw him, standing at the edge of the square, half hidden in the shadows. I froze. My pulse slammed against my throat, a sharp, visceral panic overtaking me. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking like the other late-night wanderers. He was just standing there, watching. The distance between us was enough that I couldn't make out his face, but I didn't need to. I knew. I backed away from the balcony railing, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Get inside now. I stumbled back into the room, locking the balcony door behind me. Daniel stirred at the sound. Soph, his voice was thick with sleep. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. I climbed back into bed, my back to him, pulling the covers up to my chin like a child. Maybe if I ignored it, if I just shut my eyes and forced myself into sleep, it would be gone by morning. Maybe. The next day, I didn't say anything. Not at breakfast, not during our hike along the coastal path, not even when Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders and told me I seemed quiet. I wasn't quiet. I was listening, watching, scanning every crowd, every passing face. I didn't see him, not once. By the time evening rolled around, I almost believed I had imagined it. Maybe I was sleep-deprived, caught in some loop of paranoia. I convinced myself I had mistaken another person for him, that I had let my mind warp a random traveler into something sinister. We had planned dinner at a small restaurant tucked into the cliffs, a place I had read about months before. The kind of spot where the tables were carved from stone, the wine poured without asking, the waiters treating every guest like a lifelong friend. Daniel was already relaxed again, stretching out in his chair as the waiter refilled his glass. "You feeling better?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I think I just needed a good day." The words were barely out of my mouth when I heard the shutter. A camera. Click. A soft, unmistakable sound. I stiffened, my blood running cold. Daniel didn't seem to notice, still glancing at the menu, but I felt it someone taking a picture. Slowly, I turned my head. At the far end of the restaurant, just past the flickering glow of the candlelit tables, he was sitting. I went completely still. For the first time I could see him properly. No shadows, no blur. He was older than I had imagined, mid-50s maybe, with thinning hair and a face so completely unremarkable it sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I had expected something monstrous, something that fit the slow-building horror in my gut, but he looked normal. And that made it so much worse. Because it meant he wasn't some ghostly anomaly, some supernatural trick of the light. He was real, and he was still taking photos. The camera sat on the table in front of him, his hands resting casually on either side of it. He wasn't holding it up to his face, wasn't even trying to be discreet. He just sat there, staring directly at me. Click. I shot up so fast my chair scraped against the stone. Daniel blinked. "What the hell?" "We have to go." My voice was unsteady. Daniel followed my gaze, then frowned. "Who's that?" I grabbed his wrist, trying to pull him up. "I don't know, just let's go." Daniel hesitated, but something in my expression must have convinced him because he dropped some cash on the table without question. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder as we wove through the maze of streets back toward the villa. I half expected him to be following us, to turn a corner and see him standing there. But he wasn't. When we finally reached the villa, I locked the door behind us, my hands trembling. Daniel was watching me now, his brow furrowed. "Sophia, what the hell is going on?" I shook my head. "It's him. He was there, at the restaurant, taking photos of me." Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, that's weird, yeah. But maybe he's just a creep. Some old guy who..." "It's not just that." My voice cracked. "He's in all our photos, Daniel, before we even got here, before we even left. I don't know how, but he's in them." Daniel looked skeptical, but then I saw it, that flicker of doubt, of unease. I turned toward my bag, grabbing the camera. "I can show you. I'll show you everything." But when I flipped the camera on, my stomach dropped. The photos were gone. Every single one. The screen flashed. "No files found." I felt like I was sinking. No, they were here. Daniel was at my side now, staring at the screen. "What do you mean gone?" I frantically scrolled, searching, knowing they had been there just hours ago, but there was nothing. Like they had never existed. Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Okay, this is getting fucking weird." I gripped the camera tighter, my pulse pounding. Someone had erased them, and I had a feeling it wasn't me. The next morning I woke with the unmistakable sense that something had shifted, a wrongness that clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Daniel was still asleep, his arms sprawled over the empty space where I had been lying, his breathing deep and steady. I envied him for that. For the ability to shut everything out, to exist in the kind of deep unconsciousness that didn't allow for fear or second guessing. I rolled over and grabbed my camera off the nightstand, my fingers tight around the body of it. The images were gone, I knew that. But some desperate part of me kept hoping it had been a mistake, a glitch. Maybe if I turned it on now, they'd all be there, untouched, like nothing had happened. I clicked the power button. The screen blinked to life. "No files found." My stomach clenched. It didn't make sense. Cameras didn't just erase themselves. I shoved the camera back into my bag and slid out of bed, careful not to wake Daniel. The sun had barely begun to rise, its weak gold light spilling through the cracks in the shutters, making the room feel eerily soft, almost fragile. The villa was silent, save for the occasional shift of wood settling in the walls, the distant hush of the sea below. I stepped onto the balcony, gripping the cool iron railing, and scanned the streets below. Empty. But I knew better than to believe I was alone. Somewhere he was watching. I just didn't know where. The thought made my skin crawl. I turned back inside and grabbed my laptop from the table, opening it with the urgency of someone grasping at the last thread of logic. The camera files were gone, but maybe they were still on the memory card. I plugged it into the laptop, heartbeat thick in my ears. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared. I clicked it open. Inside was only one file. A video. My hands went cold. I hadn't recorded any videos. I hesitated, then hit play. The screen flickered, static swallowing the first few seconds. Then darkness. A deep, inky black, as if the camera had been left recording inside a room with no light. A low sound filtered through, breathing. Not mine. Not Daniel's. Something else, slow, deliberate. I felt a sharp pulse of nausea, but I forced myself to keep watching. The screen remained dark for what felt like forever, and then, without warning, the image shifted. A hotel hallway, dimly lit. The angle was tilted, like the camera had been held at someone's side. The carpet was a faded red, the kind that soaked up years of footsteps, of voices, of weight pressing down. The hallway stretched forward, empty except for a single figure. Me. My breath locked in my throat. It was me standing outside the villa door, fumbling for the key. The timestamp in the corner was from last night. I felt like I was sinking. This wasn't a recording I had taken. Someone had filmed me. A slow dread bled into my limbs as I watched myself on screen, unaware, completely vulnerable. The way I shifted my bag, tucked my hair behind my ear, oblivious to the fact that someone was behind me. Close enough to record me, close enough to reach out, and the video cut to static. The screen went black again, but the audio remained, that slow, deliberate breathing. And then, just before the file ended, a whisper. My name. I slammed the laptop shut so hard it nearly toppled off the table. The room spun. I clutched the edge of the chair, trying to steady myself, but my skin felt electric with terror, my pulse erratic. This is real. This is happening. I turned toward the bed, my voice caught somewhere between a whisper and a shout. Daniel. He stirred, groaning as he pushed himself upright. What's? His eyes narrowed at my expression. Jesus, Soph, you look like you've seen a ghost. I shook my head, still gripping the laptop like it might disappear. The photos are gone, but there's a video. Daniel rubbed his eyes. What video? I swallowed, pushing the laptop toward him. It's not mine. Someone took it. Someone filmed me outside the villa last night. That woke him up fast. He frowned, his movements sharper now as he opened the laptop again. I watched his face as he played the video, his usual easy confidence shifting into something stiffer, something unreadable. By the time it ended, his jaw was tight. Okay, he exhaled, shutting the screen. That's not normal. No shit. I realized my hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists, willing the feeling away. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing the small space between the bed and the table. His mind worked differently than mine. He didn't jump straight to horror. He jumped to fixing things. First thing we're checking out. Today, we'll go somewhere else. Somewhere busier, somewhere less. He gestured vaguely at the villa. It made sense. It was also exactly what he would expect us to do. I wrapped my arms around myself. And then what? Then we go to the police. We show them this. He motioned toward the laptop. They can track where the video came from. Maybe they can find this guy. I wanted to believe it would be that simple. Daniel grabbed his phone, scrolling quickly. I'll book a new hotel, somewhere further inland. We'll... A loud knock echoed from the door. We both went rigid. The air between us stretched, tight and fragile. The knock came again, slow, measured. Not the hurried, distracted knock of hotel staff. Not the impatient rap of a guest at the wrong door. A knock meant to be heard. I moved first, grabbing Daniel's arm. My voice was barely above a whisper. Don't open it. Daniel hesitated. What if it's... Knock. This time it was softer. Like whoever was on the other side knew we were right there. Like they were waiting. I reached for my phone, heart hammering. We should call the front desk, call someone. But before I could, a small rustling sound made me freeze. Something slipping under the door. A piece of paper. Daniel stared at it. So did I. Neither of us moved. Finally, he bent down, picking it up with cautious fingers. He turned it over, his brow furrowing. There were only 4 words. Words that made my breath catch, my stomach drop, my entire body turn cold. You can't delete me. Daniel and I stared at the note as if expecting it to change, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something harmless, something that didn't send ice curling through my veins. You can't delete me. The paper itself was ordinary hotel stationery, the kind you found in every drawer of every rented room. But the handwriting was sharp, deliberate, not rushed, not messy, calm. I pressed my palm against my forehead, willing myself to stay steady. This isn't just some random guy following us, Daniel. This is... I struggled for the right word. for something that could encompass the sick, sinking feeling in my stomach. Daniel exhaled slowly, his grip on the note tightening. His face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his muscles had gone rigid. "Okay," he said, "we leave, right now." I didn't argue. We packed in silence, moving quickly, stuffing clothes into our bags with none of the usual care. It was messy, frantic, but I didn't care. I just needed to be out of that villa, out of that room. Daniel called a car while I threw the last of my things into my backpack. I booked a place in Sorrento. Busy area, lots of people. We'll be safer there. Safer. The word felt thin, weak. I wasn't sure anywhere felt safe anymore. 15 minutes later, we were in the back of a taxi, speeding away from the cliffs of Positano. The villa disappeared behind the winding roads, swallowed by the rising morning mist. I should have felt relief. I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving didn't matter. That distance wasn't the solution. That he, whoever he was already ahead of us. Daniel rested a hand on my knee. "We'll go straight to the police once we check in. We'll show them the note, the video." My stomach twisted. The video. I yanked my bag into my lap, unzipping the side pocket where I had stashed my laptop. I flipped it open, my fingers moving too fast, my pulse hammering as I pulled up the files. Empty. Not just the video, everything. Every document, every photo, every piece of data wiped clean. I let out a small, breathless sound, part disbelief, part sheer terror. Daniel leaned in. "What is it?" I turned the screen toward him. "It's gone. It's all gone." His expression darkened. He pulled out his phone. "Then we'll show them the message, the handwriting. It's enough to file a report." He stopped. I watched his face shift, the slight furrow in his brow. He turned his phone toward me. All his photos were gone too. Not just from the trip, everything. Every saved image, every screenshot, every video wiped as if they had never existed. My throat went dry. "We've been hacked," Daniel said, but his voice was thinner now, less certain. It didn't feel like hacking. It felt like something else. We pulled into Sorrento just after noon, the streets bustling with tourists. It should have comforted me being surrounded by so many people, but all I could think was any one of them could be him. Daniel checked us in while I hovered near the entrance, my fingers tight around the strap of my bag. The hotel was sleek, modern, too new for someone to slip around unnoticed. Cameras in the lobby, at the elevators. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Once we got to our room, Daniel locked the door behind us. He double-checked it, then closed the curtains before sitting on the bed, rubbing his face. "We need to go to the police," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "I know," he muttered. But neither of us moved. Because deep down, we both knew it wouldn't help. What could we even say? That a faceless man had been following us? That our files had vanished, our pictures erased? That he knew exactly where we were at all times? The police wouldn't take it seriously. It was too strange, too thin, too unreal. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of it pressing down on my ribs. I reached for Daniel's hand without thinking, gripping it tightly. He squeezed back, his thumb brushing against mine. "I think," I said slowly, "he wants us to be afraid." Daniel nodded, his gaze distant. "He's doing a damn good job of it." That night, neither of us slept. We kept the lights on, sat up in bed, taking turns glancing toward the door, toward the window. The fear was a living thing in the room with us, thick and suffocating. At some point, exhaustion took over. I don't remember closing my eyes, don't remember drifting off. But I remember waking up, because something was wrong. The room was dark, too dark. The bedside lamp that had been on all night was off, the glow from the hallway gone. Even the distant lights from the city outside seemed to have been swallowed. I reached for Daniel, but my hand met empty sheets. I sat up fast, my pulse slamming in my ears. "Daniel?" No answer. My hands fumbled for my phone, but the screen remained black. I pressed the power button, tried again. Nothing. I swung my legs over the bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. The silence was wrong. Hotels were never completely quiet there. Were always distant voices, muffled footsteps, the hum of air conditioning. But now, nothing. I took a step toward the bathroom, my breath shallow. Daniel? Then a click. The bedside lamp flickered back to life. And Daniel was standing at the far side of the room, facing the wall. His back was to me, his posture unnaturally stiff. I swallowed hard. Daniel? He didn't move. I stepped closer, something twisting deep in my gut. What are you? Then I saw it. The camera. It was in his hands, raised to his face. The screen was on, casting a faint glow over his fingers. He was looking at something through the viewfinder. I moved closer, my pulse erratic. Then he spoke. But his voice wasn't right. It was distant, detached, not his. He's in here with us. My stomach flipped. What? Daniel finally turned. And in his hands, on the camera screen, was a live feed of me, standing exactly where I was. But behind me, just over my shoulder, someone else, watching. I turned. The room was empty. The camera wasn't. I choked out a breath, but my body wouldn't move. I could see him, the figure, standing so close, just inches away. His face was still blurred, still wrong, like a distortion that shouldn't exist. Daniel dropped the camera. We have to. The lights flickered. Then everything went black. The darkness swallowed the room completely, a thick and absolute void. Not just the absence of light, but something deeper, something suffocating. The kind of darkness that pressed against my skin, that filled the spaces between my ribs, that watched. I couldn't see Daniel, but I could feel his presence beside me. His breathing was uneven, sharp. My own breath came in shallow bursts, barely there. I reached for him. My fingers brushed his wrist, cold with sweat. Daniel. Before I could finish, the camera flickered back on. Not the lights, just the camera. The tiny screen glowed weakly on the floor where it had fallen. And it was still recording. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me not to grab Daniel and run, to leave everything behind and never look back. But I looked. The screen showed us. Daniel and me, standing exactly where we were, frozen, waiting. And behind us, closer, no whim. No blur, no shadow, no distortion. Just a man. A face I didn't recognize, but somehow deep in my bones I knew him. I had always known him. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even threatening. It was worse. It was expectant. As if this moment, this exact second had been inevitable. As if everything had led us here. I felt something move behind me. Too close. I spun, but there was nothing, just the empty hotel room. But the air had changed. Heavy, stagnant, wrong. Daniel grabbed my hand. I barely registered it, my body rigid, locked in place. The camera started glitching, the image stuttering, warping. But the last thing I saw before the screen cut to black was his mouth. Moving. Forming silent words. I didn't need sound to understand them. You found me. The hotel room lights blinked back on. I gasped, the sudden brightness searing my eyes. The silence was gone. In its place, the muffled sound of voices outside, the distant hum of traffic, the normal world, back in place. As if nothing had happened. As if nothing had ever been wrong. The camera was still on the floor. I bent down, slowly, feeling the tremor in my own fingers. The screen was blank, the files gone. Again. I turned to Daniel. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. Did you? My voice cracked. Did you see it? Daniel swallowed. He looked like he wanted to deny it, to brush it off, to fix it the way he always did. But he couldn't. because he had seen it too. I didn't wait for an answer. I grabbed my bag, my hands moving on autopilot, shoving everything inside. Daniel followed my lead, zipping up his suitcase, his movements clipped and tight. We didn't speak. We left the hotel in under 10 minutes. We didn't check out. We didn't stop walking until we were at the station, surrounded by a sea of travelers, people with destinations, people who existed in a world where things made sense. We boarded the next train to Rome without a plan, without a second thought. It didn't matter where we went, as long as it was away. For hours we sat in silence, the rhythmic hum of the train tracks the only sound between us. Daniel held my hand, but neither of us spoke. What was there to say? That we had been followed? That someone or something had erased itself from our records, from our lives? That we had been watched by a presence that didn't obey the rules of logic, of time, of reality? Who would believe it? Hell, I barely believed it. All I knew was this. We weren't going back. Not to Sorrento, not to Positano, not to anywhere he had followed us. And we weren't looking at the photos. Not anymore. I still had my camera. I could have taken it out, checked it, searched for any last traces of evidence. But I didn't, because I knew he would be there. He always was, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of looking again. So I left the camera in my bag. I let it sit there, untouched, until we returned home weeks later. And then, on a cold morning in our apartment, without hesitation, I threw it in the trash. Not because I thought it would stop him, but because I refused to keep looking. Because I refused to let him know that I still felt him. That some nights, even now, I wake up with the suffocating certainty that I'm being watched. That even in the safest places, I still feel it. That presence, just out of sight. Just beyond the edge of the frame. Waiting. I first noticed her on a Monday. It was cold, the kind of sharp morning where you can see your breath in the air, and the bus stop was nearly empty except for a few early commuters, and her. She couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, standing near the curb with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She wasn't playing on a phone like most kids. She just stood there, shifting from foot to foot, staring down the road as if she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. I remember thinking it was odd kids her age usually had parents hovering nearby, but she was alone. I got on my bus, sat near the window, and glanced back at her one last time. The next day, she was there again. Same spot, same posture, same distant look in her eyes. For weeks, it became part of my routine. Every morning I'd walk to my stop, and she'd be there at hers. I never spoke to her, never had a reason to, but I always noticed her. Always alone, always waiting. Then, one morning, she wasn't there. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids get sick, they sleep in, they miss the bus. But then another day passed, and another, and another. By the end of the week, I caught myself looking for her. I'd glance toward her usual spot, expecting to see that small frame, that faded backpack, those restless movements. But she was gone. And no one else seemed to care. I hadn't even realized how much I had expected to see her every day, until she wasn't there anymore. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I didn't even know her. She was just some random kid at a bus stop. Still, a nagging feeling settled in the back of my mind. I told myself I wouldn't ask about her, that it wasn't my business. But a few days later, as I was grabbing coffee at the corner cafe, I found myself asking the barista just casually, just in passing. Hey, you ever notice that kid who waits at the bus stop across the street? The little girl? She frowned, confused. What girl? The one with the backpack, I said, feeling oddly self-conscious. She was there every morning for weeks. She hasn't been there lately. The barista gave me a strange look, then shook her head. I don't remember any kid. That was the first time I felt that creeping sensation in my gut, the one that whispered, "Something isn't right." I brushed it off. Maybe she just wasn't paying attention. Maybe she wasn't on shift in the mornings. But the feeling didn't go away. I started asking around casual questions at first, to regular commuters, shop owners. No one remembered her. Not one person. I told myself it was normal. People don't pay attention to strangers, especially not quiet little girls standing at bus stops. But I noticed her. Why didn't anyone else? The thought burrowed into my brain, gnawed at me while I worked, while I ate, while I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling. She had to have been real. I saw her every day. Didn't I? Then, a few days later, I met the old woman. She ran the tiny convenience store just down the street from the bus stop, the kind of place that still had a ringing bell over the door. I asked her the same question I'd asked the barista. And this time, she didn't look at me like I was crazy. She went very, very still. Her eyes flicked toward the window, toward the bus stop, and then back to me. "You mean the little girl?" she asked quietly. A surge of relief washed over me. Finally. "Yes, you remember her?" The woman hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "That girl went missing years ago." Something cold unfurled in my chest. I let out a nervous laugh. No, I mean recently. She was just there a few weeks ago." The woman shook her head slowly. "She used to wait at that bus stop every morning," she murmured. "Then one day, she was gone. No one ever found her." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Are you sure?" Her eyes flicked to the window again. "You're not the first person to ask about her." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Every few years," she said, "someone comes in, asking about that girl, and every time, no one else remembers her." A chill crept down my spine. I forced myself to smile, to laugh it off. "That's a little creepy." She just nodded. I left the store quickly, the automatic door shutting behind me with a hiss. The air outside felt too thick. I walked to the bus stop and stood there, staring at the empty sidewalk, at the spot where she used to stand. She had been real. I knew she had. Hadn't she? But if that was true, where was she now? And why was I the only one who remembered her? I couldn't let it go. I told myself I would. I told myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't my business, that I was obsessing over a stranger kid I never even spoke to. But I knew that was a lie, because something wasn't right. Every morning I found myself looking at that bus stop, expecting to see her there again, even though I knew she wouldn't be. It had become a habit, a compulsion. My mind replayed the same question over and over. Where did she go? Or worse, was she ever really there? That thought sat like a stone in my gut. The old woman's words haunted me. "You're not the first person to ask about her." What did that even mean? I started digging. It began with old news articles. I spent hours scrolling through archives, looking for anything about a missing girl from my town. There were a few cases over the years, runaways, tragic accidents, but none of them matched. None of them were her. The frustration gnawed at me. My memories of her were clear. I could picture her perfectly, her slightly oversized coat, the way she shifted on her feet, the way she never looked at her phone like the other kids. She had to exist. But then why couldn't I find a single piece of proof? I tried to push it out of my mind, but it followed me everywhere. At work, my fingers hovered over my keyboard, lost in thought. On my commute home, I felt a phantom presence beside me, like I should have been able to see her standing at that bus stop, waiting. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out my phone and started searching social media. Nothing. No posts, no missing person flyers, no old classmates reminiscing about a friend who disappeared. But then I had a thought. The bus stop was right in front of a small grocery store, and stores had security cameras. I didn't even hesitate. The next day, I walked straight into the store and found the manager, a tired-looking man in his 40s with coffee stains on his shirt. "Hey," I said, as casually as possible. "I was wondering, do you keep security footage from the parking lot?" He frowned. "Why?" I hesitated. "I think I lost something near the bus stop a few weeks ago, just trying to check if I can spot it." It was a lie, but close enough to the truth. The manager scratched his chin. "We don't keep footage for long, maybe a month if nothing major happens. I can check." My pulse quickened as he led me to a small back office with a bank of security monitors. He clicked through some files, pulling up recorded footage from 3 weeks ago. I leaned in, my breath shallow. The screen showed the bus stop. I watched, anticipation curling in my stomach. The date in the corner of the screen matched the week I remembered seeing her last. The footage played. Morning commuters. A few cars pulling in and out of the parking lot. And then, me, standing at the bus stop, alone. I felt my chest tighten. "No, this isn't right. Go back." The manager rewound the footage, played it again. There I was, in the exact spot I always stood, talking to no one. A cold sweat broke out along my back. My legs felt weak. "Do you want me to check another day?" the manager asked, giving me a wary look. I nodded. My hands were clammy. He pulled up footage from the day before that. There I was again, standing at the bus stop, talking, gesturing, to empty space. A deep unease settled into my bones. "No," I whispered. The manager glanced at me. "You sure you're looking for something real, man?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because in the footage, I wasn't just standing there. I was smiling. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't just imagined the girl. I had interacted with her, engaged in conversations that, according to this footage, never happened. I stumbled out of the store, my stomach twisting, my head ached. I could feel the weight of the manager's eyes on me as I left, like he was watching a man unravel. I barely noticed the walk home. My body moved on autopilot, my mind spiraling. I knew what I saw. I knew she was real. But if she wasn't, if she had never been there then, who the hell had I been talking to? That night, I barely slept. My thoughts were a tangled mess, looping the same questions over and over. Had I hallucinated her? Was I losing my mind? At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Then, at 2:34 a.m., I woke up. A soft noise, a whisper, right outside my window. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. The room was dark, shadows stretching long across the walls. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, but the feeling was there. That creeping, skin-crawling sensation of being watched. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. A shape, small, still, standing on the sidewalk just beyond the glow of the street lamp. My throat closed. I couldn't move. The shape shifted, stepped forward. The light caught her face. It was her, the missing girl. The girl no one remembered. The girl I had supposedly never spoken to. She stood motionless, her dark eyes locked onto mine through the glass. And then, she smiled. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at her, at that impossible, unshakable presence standing on the sidewalk outside my window. The missing girl, the girl no one remembered, the girl I had supposedly never spoken to. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, her dark eyes locked onto mine through the glass. And then, she smiled. Something about it was wrong, not in a horror movie way, not twisted or unnatural, but in the way that made my stomach tighten. It was familiar, too familiar. I knew that smile. And then she raised a hand, slow, deliberate, and waved. Like she knew me. Like we were friends. The room felt unbearably small. My breathing was shallow, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I needed to get out. Without taking my eyes off her, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My fingers were damp with sweat. I fumbled to unlock it, but when I looked back up, she was gone. A shiver ran through me. I threw off my blankets, rushing to the window, scanning the sidewalk, the street, the empty yards. Nothing. She had vanished. I swallowed hard, stepping back from the glass, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was sleep-deprived, losing it, falling deeper into some obsessive spiral. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had seen her. She was real. And then my phone buzzed in my hand. A text. From an unknown number. Just 2 words. Remember me? A chill shot through me. My grip tightened around my phone. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to delete the message, shut my phone off, pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. So I did the only thing I could think of. I texted back, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. Look deeper. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I did exactly what the message said. I looked deeper. I spent hours online, scouring old missing persons reports, searching every forum, every archived article. My head ached, my vision blurred, but I kept going. And then I found it. Not in a news report, not in a police database, but in an old school yearbook from my school. 15 years ago. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the scanned pages, and then, there she was. The girl from the bus stop. Same face, same eyes, I stared at the page, barely breathing. My hands shook as I read her name. Samantha Caldwell. The name hit me like a punch. Caldwell. As in Mr. Caldwell. Rachel's dad. The man who had been arrested. The stalker. Number. No, that didn't make sense. I flipped through the yearbook, skimming for details, my pulse racing, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A memorial page. In loving memory of Samantha Caldwell. She had died the summer after that school year, drowned in a lake. Her father, Mr. Caldwell, had reported her missing, but the body wasn't found for weeks. By then, it was too late. I slammed the laptop shut, my head pounding. Samantha Caldwell. The girl no one else remembered. The girl I had seen every morning. The girl I had talked to. I ran a shaky hand down my face, forcing myself to think. This had to be a coincidence. I was sleep-deprived, paranoid, spiraling. Maybe I saw her picture years ago and it got stuck in my subconscious. Maybe I was just... My phone buzzed again. Another text. Now do you remember? I felt sick. I didn't know what this meant. I didn't want to. But something deep in my gut told me I had to find out. I needed proof. The next morning, I went to the one place I hadn't checked yet. City records. It took some convincing, but I got a board clerk to pull old student attendance records from my school, ones dating back to when I would have been in kindergarten. And there, on the list, was my name. And hers. Samantha Caldwell. In my class. In my school. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation like something just out of reach, just past the surface of my memory, something I couldn't grasp. Then I saw the footnote next to her name. Transferred mid-year. Transferred? But the yearbook said she died. My hands felt numb as I checked another set of records, my breath catching as I found another Samantha Caldwell listed at a different school in another town, only to be marked as withdrawn again. She had been moved. Again and again. Erased from one place, moved to another, then erased again. I had thought she was a ghost, a hallucination, a trick of my own mind. But Samantha Caldwell had been very, very real. Someone had tried to make sure she was forgotten, but I had remembered. And now, someone else knew I did. My phone buzzed one last time. Goodbye, Alex. I felt my blood turn to ice. I hadn't given anyone my name. I looked around. The air was still. The bus stop was empty. And I knew deep in my bones this was over. Whoever had been watching me, whoever had been making me remember, they were done. And for some reason I didn't want to know why.